Welcome back. So today we're going to be making the Noel Christmas Stocking pattern, and I wrote this pattern with jelly roll strips in mind. The reason why is because I have all kinds of extra jelly roll strips hanging around, and I thought that most people would too, so I decided to go ahead and find a way to use up these jelly roll strips in a way that would give us a nice little patchwork look. And so this is what I came up with. So what you're going to need for this project is you're going to need to print out your pattern. So the pattern is going to be available in our Etsy store. I'm going to go ahead and show you how to do it here on the video, but if you want the printable pattern with the templates, then you will need to purchase the pattern. Like I said, I will put a link below, but your pattern is going to come like this, and then we're going to tape it all together. I don't know about you, like I said before in other videos, I always just use scrap paper. So that's why mine is going to look a little bit different if you flip it over. But I've already got one that's assembled here. So you don't have to do this right away. Some people like to do it first thing. I'm not one of those people, but I did have this from a sample that I made. So you're going to need the printed pattern. You're going to need at least 6 jelly roll strips. So I suggest lights and darks. This one isn't exactly light and dark, but I do think that the colors have enough of a contrast where I think we're going to get the look that we want. So 2 blues, 2 greens, 2 pinks, and for additional variety, I'm going to cut them like this right here in that middle mark. That way I can come up with some additional strip sets that will give us some more variety. So I'll show you here in just a minute what that's gonna entail, and I probably shouldn't have done this right away, but anyway, here we are. Oh darn it. And then you're also going to need 2 pieces of fusible fleece. You can choose to use quilt batting if you'd like. That's entirely up to you. I like to do the fusible fleece because then we can just press it all down and it makes it nice and smooth before you go to quilt it. So we'll need 2 pieces of I think 13" by 19" fusible fleece. You've got one side that's fusible, the other side's plain, and then you're going to need backing fabric. So for me, here we go with that economy situation again. I had bought a bunch of fabric off of Facebook Marketplace from someone who was just getting rid of all of their stuff, and a lot of the bolts of the fabric that they had were some pretty low quality cheap fabrics. So I keep those around for doing things just like this, for doing like linings and for doing all kinds of things that the fabric quality isn't as necessary. So I did just cut out a couple of pieces of my cheap fabric for the lining because the stockings are only going to get used once a year, so I'm not really worried about the wear and tear on them. And then of course the white matches, so you're going to do 2 pieces of 13" by 19" for the backing as well. And also being that this is the cutting space, you'll be able to get your little hang tab off of one of the sides of the backing fabric too. So these are the pieces that you need, and I'm gonna go ahead and set these aside so that I can start showing you how to get ready to do your strip sets. So the first thing that you're gonna wanna do is sew your strip sets together. And another helpful thing is I have this Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer. It's by New Leaf Stitches, and it's got all kinds of markings. I'll show you how to use those later, but invest in one of these, it'll be worth it, I promise. So either you're going to take your full strip or your half strips. Like I said, I did cut mine in half, and that just gives me a little bit more variety in my HSTs, or half square triangles, if you're not familiar with what an HST is. And then we're just going to go and try to make some little sets. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all these strip sets, pick 2 colors. So I would recommend, you know, a blue and a green, or a green and a pink, or whatever, and you're going to put them right sides together like this, and then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew down the entire length of both sides. So match these up as best as you can. I don't typically use clips or pins in mine. I just kind of sew along, and I think I do just fine. But anyway, you're going to do these right sides together. You're going to sew 1/4 inch down this side and 1/4 inch down this side. So like I said, you're going to want to pair up all your sets. Either if you have full the full strip set, or if you cut them in half for more variety, you're going to go ahead and take all of these over to the sewing machine, and then I'll show you how that part is done. So real quick, I wanted to jump back in here and show you what I did for my strip set. So as I said, in the pattern, it says to use one dark and one light, and I did just a little bit different, but you're going to end up with 3 strip sets if you don't cut your jelly roll strips in half. But if you do cut them in half, I just kind of wanted to show you what that looks like. And this is what I did. So just basically I put sets of 2 with nice contrasting colors. And then when you make your stocking, you're going to end up with, again, a little bit more variety. That's why I did it this way. So if you want to stick with just the regular 3 strip sets that the pattern calls for, be my guest. That is completely up to you. But like I said, for me, I wanted just a little bit more variety. So I did want to show you real quick what that looks like. Okay, so now that your strip sets are sewn, we need to cut the half square triangles. So in the beginning of the video, I showed you this slotted trimmer ruler, which is the Clearly Perfect Slotted Trimmers by New Leaf Stitches, Carrie Carr. We want to cut a 2.5 inch half square triangle. So let me show you 2 different ways that you can do this. So either you can take a regular ruler, which is just like a regular square ruler that has, you know, 2.5 inch marks, which it's going to have for sure. You're going to take your 2.5 inch mark here and 2.5 inch mark here, and you're going to line it up on the seam line. Okay, so make sure that on the seam line, both sides, you're at the 2.5 inch mark. Then you're going to trim it both ways. Now, in the pattern, I show you, or in the pattern, the instructions will tell you that you can kind of go this way, whatever. But you can also do it another way, which is going to be take that 2.5 inch mark it, or put it right there at the end, at the tip of that triangle. Same thing, 2.5 inch here, and then trim it up, and you've got 2 triangles. Okay, now at the end, you're going to have to take your trimmer and just kind of trim off your ends. Or there's one more way that you can do this that I have discovered makes things just a little bit easier for me, is you can take your slotted trimmer, and I just do it like this, and then we're going to just line it up exactly like we need to trim it. Do my cut, do my little slots, and then I don't have to worry about trimming those in the end because they're already trimmed. Oops, that's supposed to be trimmed, but it's not. So you can do it either way. You can use the slotted trimmer to do the 2.5 inch unfinished triangle, or you can use your regular ruler and do this way and whatnot. So we're going to go ahead and go through all of these, get all of these trimmed up. I've already been working on them off camera here. So then once these are all trimmed up, we're going to come back and I'm going to show you how to lay these out. Okay, so now that we have all of our half square triangles cut and ready to go, the next thing we have to do is press them and get them ready to assemble in our pattern. So just want to lay them flat before you open them up, just to kind of set that seam. And then you're just going to pick a side to press on. Normally you would press to where the seam part is on the dark side, but being that these are, for me at least, about the same color, I'm not really worried about it. I'm just going to press them and get them out of the way. And then we will move on to figuring out where they all go. Now, when I'm pressing my half square triangles, especially after I've used the slotted ruler, sometimes I find that I get just a little bit of extra over here. I don't worry about that too much when I'm trying to sew. I usually just worry about the edges of the fabric, but if you wish to trim that off and make it completely square, then that's totally up to you. That's just not something that I worry all that much about. Okay. Oh, and another thing that I encounter occasionally is, you see that, how it's just a little bit over. I assume it's just something that I'm doing wrong when I'm trimming them, but again, it's just something I don't tend to worry about all that much. So let's get this out of the way. And now we have all of these pressed and trimmed half square triangles that are 2.5 inches square. So we are going to lay them out in we're going to lay them out in 9 different rows and 5 pieces across for the first 6, and then 6 pieces for the last 3. So you're just going to choose whichever way you want. The way that I did it in my sample was I tried to choose the dark sides all going the same way, but because these aren't all the dark side, these are all just kind of all over the place. You can put them however which way you want to. 5, and then like I said, we're going to go down. Oh, let's go this. Let's do this. Hopefully you can still see. Go down 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'll go that way. 9. So, like I said, the last 3 rows we're gonna do 6 pieces across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And like I said, this will be for the last 3. And then the ones above them are only going to be 5. And I'm just doing this really fast so that you can kind of see the way this goes. And then I will definitely go back and try to make them a little bit more pleasing to the eye, the way that I want to see my stuff go. But if you can notice, this is exactly why I told you to cut your pieces in half, is because it gives you a little bit more variety on what your squares look like. And in fact, you can use as many jelly roll strips as you want to for that added variety. That is entirely up to you. So, okay. And the extra, you will end up with a few extra pieces. The extra pieces you can just set aside for another project. I'm just going to toss them over that way. So this is what we end up with. I hope that you can see there. I think the bottom of the camera might get cut off a little bit. There we go. So like I said, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across for 6 rows, and then you've got 3 rows that are 6 across. Now, when you assemble this, okay, again, once you get the layout that you like, which this is definitely not the layout that I want, so I will do a whole bunch of, you know, turning around and that kind of stuff. Once you're done with that, you're going to sew these together. So you'll put right sides together, sew those. Now, I do like to strip piece this. So what I'm going to do is, as I go down, when I go to the machine, I will do this. I'll put these here and then sew all these, and then I'll come back and do the next set, and then I'll kind of sew them all together. So hopefully you do strip piecing too, because it does save you some thread, saves you some time. But like I said, the next step is to sew all these together. So you're going to sew all your rows together, and then we'll sew the columns together. So then once we're all sewn together, we're going to give it a nice good press, and then we're going to press it to the fleece and then quilt it. So right now we'll go ahead and go over to the machine and get all of this assembly done. Okay, so now that we've got our rows sewn together, we press them, and then we're getting ready to set up to put it all together, you know, sew everything together to finish off the front part of the stocking, or at least finish off the patchwork of the front part of the stocking. Now, when I pressed these, I pressed them all to this side when I went this way, and then on these, oh, I did the same thing, but technically you're supposed to do it like that. So anyway, you're gonna press all this way on this row, then this way, then this way, then this way. That way they don't give you too much bulk when you're getting it all pressed and flattened together. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put, you know, right sides together, and we're going to start sewing all of these rows together as well until we're all done. Okay, so now we're going to sew this all together. So we're going to just take our layers here, or rows, columns, whatever you want to call them, lay them on top of each other and get them all sewn together. Now, I am not one of those who does a whole lot of precision sewing. Unfortunately, that is just not my skill set. I did my 2.5 inch squares here, my 2.5 inch half square triangles, and I thought that I was doing pretty darn good when I measured them. But unfortunately, they just didn't end up super straight. So I'm going to sew here as straight as I can and line these up the best that I can to make sure that they're as lined up as I can make them. Obviously I've got one that's a little bit over on here, but then we're just going to sew them together, or sew the rows together from top to bottom, until we get the whole half square triangle unit sewn together. So this is just the first set here. Now again, my points don't match up, and I am not heartbroken about it. I don't love it, but I'm not going to stress about it. It's just a little stocking that I'm putting together for my family, so it is okay. So then the next piece that we're putting on is this row. So then now we're going to put it right here, line that up as best we can, and now we're going to sew that piece on, and we're going to continue all the way down until we get all the pieces sewn together from top to bottom. Okay, so now that we've got all of our pieces sewn together, all the half square triangles sewn together into the shape of the stocking, we're going to go ahead and press this onto the fusible fleece, and then we're going to quilt it. I do want to make one notation real quick, and that is depending on how you want your stocking to look in the front is where you're going to make these things. So in other words, if I want the front of my stocking to be here, I'm going to make sure that these 3 extras go that way. If I want the face to turn this way, then I'm going to do that opposite. I would take these 3 and move them over here instead of right here. So just keep that in mind when you're making your stocking, which way you want your pieces to go. But anyway, we're going to take our fusible fleece and we're going to press it to the squares. So fusible fleece has 2 sides. It's got the side with the glue, which is very rough to the touch, and then the side that does not have the glue, which is very soft. So you want to make sure that your glue side up, and then you're going to place your piece here right on top of that fusible fleece, and we're just going to press. So you want to make sure that you do not put your iron directly over the white parts, because the white part is glue and you don't want all that glue to come off on your iron. So just kind of gently press and make sure that your iron, you know, base is not touching that white part. We're just going to kind of move across the stocking here, or the front basically, and then I always like to flip it over and come at it from the back side too. So I do this just to kind of get it secured and get it stuck on pretty good, and then I turn it over to the back and finish the pressing on the back. So now this, I always like to press down pretty hard, that way it gets good contact, and then I'm just going to move it across the back until I get this all completed. Now, if you'll notice, I'm sure you did notice, the front of my stocking is not precise. My half square triangles do not meet at perfect points. Nothing's perfect on my stocking, and I'm okay with that. It's never my goal to have imperfection. That's never my goal to not make straight seams or not make things straight. But I was kind of quick about this when I was sewing it all together. I did not pin my points or anything of the sort, so that's why it looks a little bit off, and it's okay. So now I just take it over and to the other side, and I just go through one more press just to make sure it's good on there. And then the very next thing that we're going to do is we're going to quilt this. Now, one thing that I did forget to mention in the beginning when I told you about the supplies that were needed, I forgot to tell you that you need a piece for the backing. So you have the choice to go ahead and do quilted on the front, or excuse me, not quilted, to do the HSTs on the front and on the back. You would obviously need twice as many half square triangles, or you can just do a plain piece of fabric. So for this example, I am going to go ahead and just do a plain piece of fabric, and you can choose to quilt that or not quilt that. Again, that is your personal choice. So if you decide that you want to quilt it, then please quilt it. If you don't want to quilt it, then don't quilt it. But we're going to also attach that to the fusible fleece. So we're just going to do the same thing, just lightly press on the front, and I'm not going to be as careful with the front because it is the same size as the fusible fleece. So I'm not all that worried about getting the glue on my iron. But the next thing we're going to do is take these pieces over to the sewing machine, and you're going to quilt them however it is you want to. So for me, when I'm doing half square triangles, I like to just do straight lines this way and this way on each side of each seam. However, because my half square triangles don't line up, I'm probably going to choose a different way to quilt this one, just because I don't want it to be super visible, my imperfections on there. So I might take it to my embroidery machine. I haven't really decided yet how I'm going to quilt this, and I'm probably, well, I might quilt the back, excuse me. I'm not really sure if I'm going to or not, but now our pieces are ready to be quilted. So this is the back of the stocking, this is the front of the stocking. Okay, so like I said, just take it over to your machine, either your embroidery machine or your sewing machine, and quilt it as desired, and then we'll come back here and start assembly. Okay, so now we're back at the machine and it's time to quilt our pillow front, or excuse me, not pillow front, our stocking front. And I've decided that I'm just going to go this way down. I'm just going to do one side, 1/4 of an inch on this side, 1/4 of an inch on this side. And the reason why I'm just going to do this is because, as you can see, my points aren't precise. They're not perfect. And so if I try to go down this way, I'm going to end up with a bit of weirdness. So I'm just going to quilt, like I said, 2 lines on each side of each seam, or excuse me, 1 line on each side of each seam. And that's how we're going to do this. And please forgive my camera angle. Everything is a little bit different now because my little camera started overheating. I've only had this camera for a month and it just started overheating today. It was overheating after about 5 minutes. So now I'm having to use my other camera. So it does have a little bit of a different view. So I apologize for the lack of continuity in this particular video, but hopefully it'll work itself out and it'll get back to normal here in just a little bit. But anyway, now we're just going to quilt. I like to take the inside mark of my presser foot here. Hopefully you can see it. I'll take it off just so you can see. So I like to go to just this inside little mark right here. And that gives me 1/8 of an inch. I know I just said a minute ago 1/4 of an inch, but I'm actually, oops, going to go ahead and do 1/8 of an inch. So I'm going to line up this seam with this line here, and then I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to go each seam, and then I will, and of course I say that and I'm a little bit off here, but there we go. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of that seam. So I'll go all the ones that go this direction, I'll go ahead and do at the same time, or not the same time, but just one right after the other. And then I'm going to flip my stocking the other direction, and then I'm going to do those seams next. So I'll show you here real quick what that's going to look like. It's just this, just a simple little 1/8 of an inch seam on the side of, or excuse me, 1/8 of an inch stitch right there on the side of that seam. So now I'll move on to this one, and then like I said, once I've gone all the way down on the left side of that seam, then I'll flip my stocking around and do the other side. Okay, so now that we've got the front part quilted, the back part quilted, it's time to cut out our pattern. So it's super duper important to make sure that you have right sides together when you do your cutting. So, okay, let me back up here just for a minute. You can cut these one at a time. Okay, so you can cut them just like that and then move this over here and cut it like this, but you got to make sure to flip it over. Okay, so you're going to have one this direction, the other one this direction. This makes sure that you can put your pieces together and they're done correctly. But here's what I recommend. So this is the right side of my backing. So this is my fusible fleece. This is the fabric. And then obviously we have this part. So what I'm going to recommend that you do is just put these right side together and cut both pieces out together. That's going to save you a little bit of headache. That's going to make sure that everything is exactly where it needs to be and that you don't end up with both pieces cut the same way, which means that your stocking doesn't go together. So ask me how I know. I messed up my very first sample doing it this way, or doing it that way. So this is the way that I do it now. Like I said, you got right side of your backing, right side of your front pieces. Both of these are quilted. And then I'll go ahead and get some pins and just put just 1 or 2 little pins in place just so that the whole thing doesn't shift. I always forget the pins. I'm so sorry. Ow. And then, 1 or 2 up here, just so the whole thing doesn't shift. And I like to use my rotary cutter, but you can use scissors if you wish, but because the curves are pretty smooth and they're not, you know, real sharp or anything, I just use my rotary cutter. So I like to just start here. I am going to go ahead and get my ruler here just so I can cut the top off nice and clean. And then the rest of the way, I'm just going to take my rotary cutter and just follow the edges here. Like I said, you can use scissors if you wish. I've just come to really appreciate my rotary cutter more and more every single time I use it. I just think that it helps me get nice clean cuts that might not come out as nice and neat as if I was using scissors. So, oops. Of course, it's going to mess up on camera because, you know, that's just the way of the world and that's just the way it's going to go. But anyway, I like to cut little bits of my pieces out and then kind of get them out of the way and keep moving. I am probably going to just trim that out because it looks like I missed the mark there just a little bit. But now I have this. So this is my front piece and back piece, and I'm going to show you real quick why that right sides together was so important. So now we're left with pieces like this. If I were to have cut the pattern out this way on both of them, then I would have ended up with two pieces just like this that can't, you know, go right sides together. So that's why I went ahead and just did the right sides together before I cut them out. Just makes it a whole lot easier and a lot less likely to mess up. So now we're going to take our backing fabric, or excuse me, not backing fabric, the liner, and these are also right sides together. Because I'm working with solid colors, obviously I don't need to worry about right sides and wrong sides, but if you were working with a print, you would want to make sure that your right sides together on this too. So now we're going to pin this in place. Because we're right sides together, doesn't really matter which way we do this here. Just going to pin it in a couple spots like we did with the front pieces, or excuse me, the outside pieces. And now we're just going to do it the same way. We're just going to trim off what we don't need. Now, actually, I'm going to make a modification to this real quick. So your hang tab is going to get cut off the excess fabric over here. So we need a 2.5 inch by 7 inch space. So let's just scoot this as much as we can this way. That way we have plenty of space here. So once we cut this, we are going to use this. So don't get rid of it. Just keep it handy. Now we're going to cut that. Actually, I'm not going to cut, but right there, that way we still have plenty of space for our hang tab there. And then we're going to do the same thing we did with the outside pieces and just go right around the stocking here. And if you can see, I'm accidentally cutting off just a little tiny bit of my paper. I'm not overly concerned about that. It does happen when you're working with printed patterns sometimes. So as long as you're not cutting off giant hunks, you're probably going to be okay when it comes to fitting the lining inside. And besides, having a lining that's just slightly smaller helps you anyhow. So don't worry about it. Okay, so then we're going to get this out of the way. And we need a piece of fabric for the hang tab. Actually, you know what? Let's get this off of here so that you can see what we've got left with here. So now we've got the lining pieces that are right sides together, and then we've got the outside pieces that are right sides together. So we're going to set these aside. Actually, we're not. We're going to pin them together real quick because we're going to sew these all together. Now, when we go to the sewing machine to sew this all together, you're going to leave a gap in the lining of about 3 inches. So I like to put my gap right here. So I take my pins and mark. I put them a different direction so that way I know visually what I'm doing. So these pins are, you know, well, I guess they're not all the same way, but I like to have them a different direction. So this is about 3 inches. Let me take my measuring stick here. That's what my husband calls it. Yep, I'm exactly 3 inches on the mark. So we're going to pin, or we're going to sew all the way around. So from the top here, all the way around, stop, back stitch, start, back stitch, and then go all the way back up here and end up there. Now on the front and back pieces, or excuse me, the outside pieces, we're going to do sort of the same thing, except we don't need to have that opening. Or excuse me, we don't need to have that gap in the foot. So on the outside pieces, we're just going to sew it together all the way around here. You want to make sure that you leave your top open on both. So on your lining and your outer pieces, make sure that you do not sew this top part. So you just sew around here. Okay, so we'll set those aside because when we go to the sewing machine, we are also going to cut out our hang tab here. So the hang tab needs to be 7 inches by 2.5 inches, or you can even go 8 inches if you want. So we'll just take this piece here. We're going to cut off a 2.5 inch strip. And then we're going to do 7 inches. So if I'm here, actually, I'm going to go ahead and do 8 inches on this one, just for a little extra. Okay, so when we go to sew the hang tab, what we're going to do is we're going to fold it in half. Actually, if it's printed, or if you have any kind of a print, you're going to want to make sure that your right side's together. Being that this is solid, I'm not worried about it, but you're going to fold it in half. I'm only pinning for your information, not because I would normally pin this, but we're going to make a little tube. So we're going to take it over the sewing machine, right sides together, and just sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down, and then I'll show you how we finish it over there. Okay, so now we're back at the sewing machine, and we're going to sew together the lining, the outer part, and then we're also going to sew together this hang tab. So as I mentioned before, it's a 2.5 inch by 7 or 8 inch, whichever one you prefer. I like to have a slightly larger hang tab, but 7 inches will be sufficient. But you put it right sides together, and then we're going to sew a 1/4 inch down this long side over here. And then once we're done with that, we're going to flip it inside out. So there are all kinds of tube turners that you can use. I think Clover sells a good one. You can find them on Amazon. You can find them at your local quilt store, or Michael's, or whatever, I would presume. Or you can just do it the way that I do it, and that is with a with a chopstick and a boba straw. So I'll show you how I do that real quick. It's very simple, very easy, and very effective. No need for extra tools, but that is also assuming that your boba straw fits inside your little tube, which mine does just fine. So we're going to tuck that down. You see I'm down maybe an inch, inch and a half. And then we're going to take that chopstick or pokey stick or whatever it is you want to use, and we're just going to push that through and slide this all the way down. Push it out the front. And there we go. So now we have our tube. Now, I'm going to recommend that you go over to your iron and then you press it, and then you make sure that you press with the seam in the center, and then we're going to come back and we're going to put an 1/8 of an inch top stitch. I am not going to film the ironing, so I will be right back. Okay, so now I'm back and we've got our piece ironed. So again, it's just the seam in the back. Now it's the front, and we're going to do an 1/8 of an inch top stitch. Anytime I do a top stitch, it's an 1/8 of an inch. I like to use my number 10 edge stitch foot. This is a Bernina foot, but I think most machines have an edge stitch foot, or I think they call it stitch in the ditch foot sometimes too. I know my Baby Lock has a stitch in the ditch foot, and that's what this is. So what we're going to do is move the needle all the way over there, and we're going to sew against this little guide right here. G-U-I-D-E. Guide, not guy. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and sew that on each side. That way it gives it a nice little top stitch look. When we fold that little tab over, it'll be nice and strong. Okay, then we're going to flip it over. Oh, and do the same thing on the other side. See how clean that is? Now we're going to do the same thing to the other side. And sometimes I can't get my little thread out of there. There we go. Okay, now we're just going to set this aside and I'll show you how to attach it when we get to that point. But this is what we're left with. This is a nice little hang tab. It's thick, so when you hang it onto your stocking, it'll be just what you want it to be. So we'll set that aside. And now we're going to work on the lining. So as I mentioned over there at the table, I put these marks here on the bottom of the foot. So I turned my pins this way so that I know where to start. So I'm actually going to start from that position. Change out my foot real quick. Back to the regular one. Move my needle back over. And now we're going to just start here. Oh no, actually we're going to start right here. And we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance. Actually, you know what? We're going to sew, I think the pattern says 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm sorry about that. 1/2 inch seam allowance, because that will help us get everything all tucked in on the top. So 1/2 inch seam allowance, which is going to be right about that mark right there. 1/2 inch seam allowance is really hard for me because I'm so used to using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So my brain just gets a little bit messed up with that, but we're going to give it a shot. And I'm going to back stitch a couple stitches here. Okay, and I'm going to go pretty slow so that I can make sure that I'm turning and keeping this curve on the 1/2 inch mark. I'm just going to sew all the way around. So the part that I'm watching is this right here against this guide right here. I'm not paying attention to anything else. I'm not watching the needle. I'm not watching the foot. I'm literally watching this fabric and this line. Okay, so if you need to stop your machine so that you can reposition, like here, I'm probably going to go ahead and stop and reposition a little bit. Just like that. But basically, like I said, you just want to watch that fabric and guide it along that line, and that gives you a nice clean straight, well, not straight, but gives you a nice clean seam allowance that's right on the mark where it needs to be. So like I said, I'm still watching here, and I'm going to go. Hope you can see that I'm just gradually turning my fabric as I need to. And as I said, when you start getting into the curves of the foot and the toes and things like that, you may need to stop your machine and reposition underneath your presser foot. But if you don't, awesome. But if you do, no big deal. I'm just going to back stitch a couple times there. And now I'm going to cut that. And now I'm going to start from up here. Okay. So again, we're going to leave this top part completely unsewn. Do not sew the top part. We're going to line this one up here with that mark again. Just right at my 1/2 inch mark. Stitch a couple stitches, then back stitch a couple, and then now we're going to get started on this next part. And remember, this is the lining. So the lining, actually the lining and the front piece both have to be sewn with right sides together. So it's very hard to maybe visualize that because I'm using solid color fabric, but just imagine if I were using printed fabric, that you're seeing the back side here because I'm right sides together. Okay, and I'm getting a little bit, do I need to turn my fabric underneath that presser foot, so I'm going to slow down just a little bit. And again, I'm watching this line, the fabric to this line. I'm just gently turning my fabric as I go through and sew this. Get that out of the way. And then again, we're going to just gently curve as we keep that line of fabric right next to that line on my stitch plate. I did lift my presser foot there just real quick. Because again, we got a little bit of a curve and it's easy to get it bunched up. It's easy to bunch it up if you don't lift up your presser foot when you need to lift it up. So I don't have any problem I don't feel like a failure if I have to lift my presser foot, so I'm not going to worry about it all that much. I'm going to take this out, but yet leave my finger there because that's where I need to stop. So get here, and I'm going to stop right about there. Okay, so now we're done sewing the lining. So I will just, hopefully you can see here, but at the foot, the base of the foot, we've got back stitch here, back stitch here. This opening is about 3 inches. Okay, now we're going to set this aside. And now we're going to sew together the front and the back of the outside part. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that. I didn't pin my pieces together before I shifted them so I could show you. So I am going to go ahead and do a little bit of adjustment here just to make sure that I'm as neat as I can be with my lining up here. There we go. Okay, and now we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to be 1/2 inch, which is that same mark that we started with last time. A couple stitches, back stitch, and now we're just going to keep following those lines, or keep following this line and go all the way around. Here we do not need to stop. Here we don't need to stop and leave an opening in the bottom. So the only time I'll be stopping my machine here is when I need to adjust my presser foot. So okay, I'm just going to do a little bit of adjusting here. Now again, we're watching this line with the fabric. So the line on the stitch plate at the edge of the fabric. We're just carefully turning this as we need to. I don't know if you can see, but I've got my thumb, or not my thumb, my pinky here that's kind of twisting and turning, and I've got these fingers also holding. So it's a whole bunch of finger work, but my fingers help, you know, turn where I need to turn. Sometimes your finger placement is going to be the thing that really helps you, well, really helps you get what you need to get done. I know I use my fingers a whole lot when I'm when I'm sewing strapping. Oh, and now we're back. Again, we're just staying right there along that line as we curve our stocking through the machine here. I'm just slowing down just a little bit just so I can make sure that I'm staying along that visual guide. This part's pretty quick and easy. There's really not a whole lot to be thinking about and to be worrying about. It's pretty quick. I'm just going to finish up real quick here. And then when we get to the end, we're going to back stitch. Just a couple of stitches worth. There we go. And now we're left with the front piece. So here at the machine, we just did the outside piece, the lining pieces, and then the hang tab. Okay, so now we've got all our pieces sewn together. We've got the outer pieces sewn together. We've got the lining pieces sewn together with that 3-inch gap that we talked about right there. And then we have the hang tab. So now we're going to go ahead and trim or clip our curves. So where there's curves here and curves here, curves here, curves here, you're going to want to go ahead and put a few clips in them. Just clip with your scissors right before the stitch line. Do not clip through the stitches, because if you clip through the stitches, then you're going to be resewing things. But just every 1/2 inch or so, just clip it. This is to make sure that you can turn everything the way that you need to and it looks nice and smooth. So just go ahead and clip all these curves. Like I said, about every 1/2 inch or so. There's no science to it in my opinion. I think some people like to put massive amounts of clips in their curves. I'm not one of those. I think a little bit shall suffice. And then do the same thing for your lining pieces, or yeah, your lining. And some people don't even clip the curves. So if you don't clip the curves, then I guess that's up to you. I think that it does make for a slightly smoother final project, but again, if you don't want to clip your curves, that is entirely up to you. Okay, so now we're going to take the outer pieces and we're going to turn them right side out. So just take, put your hand in there, pull it out, just like this. Take it and, smooth the heel and the toe area. Okay, so then we're left with something like this. Very cute. And then you take that hang tab piece and make sure that the seam line is on the inside. You're going to pull those together. I'm going to go ahead and trim my threads here, or maybe trim my threads, and you're going to clip it right here. So depending on how far down you want your tab to be, actually I'm going to shorten my tab quite a bit. So I'm just going to cut mine off right there because that's where I would like my tab to be. You can leave yours as long as the pattern shows, or you can trim it off like I did. I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and go over to your machine and you do a quick little baste, which is a stitch length of anywhere between 4 and 5. Just baste that into place, and then we'll come back here and I'll show you how to finish off your stocking. Okay, so now we've stitched that hang tab into place, and now it's time to actually finish the stocking. So the next thing we need to do is slip this whole thing inside the lining. So your outer pieces are right sides out. Your lining pieces are still inside out, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this whole thing, put it inside here, and then we're gonna sew along that top edge. So we'll just kind of tuck this thing in, get it all the way down, pinch it, pull it forward. The reason why we're doing this is because we want right sides together, because in sewing, that's just how we end up with good projects facing the right way, is right sides together. So now we're going to just kind of tuck that in there, and then you want to line up your seam lines here with your seam lines there, which is hard to see because you've got that hang tab in place. So take a clip and clip that there. We're going to go over to this side and do the same thing. Go ahead and pull your seams open there just so that there's not too much bulk when you go to sew it. And then I would go ahead and put maybe 1 or 2 clips on your way around here. And then we're going to go over to the machine and we're going to sew this whole line all the way across. So to sew this all together, we're going to sew around this whole top piece, and then when we're done, we're going to pull it all out through here, and then we're going to close that up and then top stitch the top, and then we'll be done. Okay, so as you can see, I've taken off the plate thing that was on my machine, and so now I'm left with just this little arm. I do this because it makes it a whole lot easier to just slide this in there. As you can see, we're just going to slide it over, and that way it gives us a nice even way to get all the way around. So just pick a spot. We're also going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance here, and then we're just going to go all the way across the top with this. Get these clips out of the way as we go. And just make sure that that edge of that fabric keeps lined up with that line, just like we did a minute ago when we were doing the sewing the pieces together. Ooh, and this is a little bit thick because we've got that hang tab in here, so I would just go a little bit slower so you don't break a needle. And keep going until you get to your starting point, and then we'll go across that point just a little bit extra. See there, I'm at my starting point. I'm just going to overlap it just a touch. Now we're going to go back to the table and I will show you how we turn it inside out. Okay, so now we're in the home stretch of our stocking here. So we have sewn this all together. We've got right sides together. Now we're just going to pull it through the bottom. So that opening that we left in the lining, we're just going to pull that out. Get our stocking turned out the right side, or turned out the right way. Get that lining pushed out. Now you can use a stick if you want, or you can use your fingers, whatever it is you want to do to push that out. And this is what you're going to be left with. So in your pattern, I have an illustration that shows it looking just like this. So now you're going to take your sewing machine and you're just going to sew up that opening right there. So just go ahead and do a little seam right there. And then you're going to go to your machine. Well, actually, you're already at your machine. Excuse me. We're going to tuck this in. So tuck that in all the way to the foot. And then we're going to top stitch this top piece here. So because you have a 1/2 inch seam allowance on that top line, that's going to make it nice for you to have plenty of space to do your top stitch, but you're just going to tuck that in there. See, just like that. And you're going to do 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch. I guess that's a personal preference, but you're going to go ahead and just top stitch all the way around. And then your stocking is done. So now we're back at the machine and we are just going to go ahead and seal up that little gap in the lining right here. So it's just like this. So we're just going to do a little bit of a stitchy stitch right there. Get that sewn up. I usually do just a little 1/8 of an inch to a 1/4 of an inch, whatever I feel inclined to do at that point. I'm just gonna, actually looks like I'm just gonna do 1/8 of an inch. And we're just gonna take that to the very end there. I got my fingers there so I know where to stop. Right about there. Back stitch it. Trim it. And now we're going to put this whole thing on inside the stocking. Just going to tuck it in just like I showed you over there. Just going to get this whole thing tucked in. And then now we're going to top stitch this top part. So we're just going to make sure that everything is nice and aligned and straight here. If we need to do any rolling with our fingers, that's totally fine. But we're going to go ahead and get started on this top stitch part. I'm just going to go start here on the back, just kind of middle in the back. I'm going to go ahead and do a 1/4 of an inch top stitch right here, as I think that'll look just a little bit nicer. So we're just going to do a quick 1/4 of an inch top stitch here. Now again, when you go through this thick part here that's got your hang tab, plus where all these pieces come together, you're just going to go a little bit slower on your machine. And then we're going to go all the way around. So we're just doing a 1/4 of an inch top stitch to finish off the stocking. We are almost to the end point here. This is where we started, so we're just going to go right over that line. And then we're going to clip our threads. I've got my giant scissors here because I forgot my little tiny ones over at the cutting table. But we are done. I hope you enjoyed making this stocking with me. As I mentioned in the very beginning of the video, there is a companion pattern that we have listed on our Etsy store, and that pattern does come with all of the instructions with illustrations. It also comes with the template to cut out to finish up your stocking. And I also want to say, thank you for joining me, because I know that I'm new to this whole video thing. I'm new to pattern writing. I'm new to all of this stuff. I know how to sew on my own. But trying to teach other people in a camera situation is a little bit uncomfortable for me. So thank you for wading through this with me. And I hope that in a few months I'm going to get better and better and better at it. And I won't forget the things that are important, and I won't stumble so much, and hopefully things just get a whole lot better. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. And I'm going to try to post at least 1 to 2 new videos every week. And if you have any questions about this pattern or about any other things that you want to see me sew, just let me know in the comments. Thanks.